tender.
Back to the Bernie Thompson Show.
To get close to each other.
It's always a pleasure to be here. I mean, people are nice, so you treat me right, you know.
Maybe you even get close to the truth.
You and Bernie, where the truth will have its day.
You know, we've been talking just about COVID all the time, it seems, and about the race relations, and there are other important things to talk about as well, and one of them is that recently Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill that eases occupational licensing, which I consider to be a terrible racket that obstructs entrepreneurship and protects big companies from competition. But it also did something else. The law includes a provision preventing Florida cities, right? The state is preventing the cities from banning food trucks or requiring operators to operate an additional local license. They have to get that. They can't do that anymore, or pay additional fees in order to vend. Pensacola has been pretty good about food trucks, but a lot of other cities have not. And so I've asked my friend Justin Pearson, the managing attorney with the Institute for Justice, to join us. Justin, welcome to the show. This is something that's very important to you, and there's some distinctions to be learned about the food truck provisions, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Bernie. I'm happy to be on.
So the cities, as I understand it, the state is no longer allowing, and I'm glad Governor DeSantis signed it, they're not allowing a blanket ban on food trucks, but they can still do some things, can't they?
Right. You're absolutely correct. As you mentioned already, the bill really does two things, but it doesn't ban all food truck regulations. The first thing it does is it says that cities and other local jurisdictions like counties can't have citywide or countywide food truck bans. It also says, as you mentioned, once a food truck owner has the state mobile vending license, cities and counties can't require local food truck permits or charge local fees to food trucks. And those things are great, but it does still leave some room for cities to impose some regulations, mostly involving zoning. And so, for example, the law does not prevent cities from having zoning laws and saying, that food trucks can only go into certain zoned areas and not, for example, residential areas or something like that. Those restrictions all stay in place, limited, of course, like all government laws, by constitutional restrictions on government power. But assuming they're abiding by the Florida Constitution and the federal Constitution, all the state preemption law says is they can't have citywide bans and they can't charge fees or impose permits, but they can still have zoning laws and things like that.
So, first of all, Justin, I'd like for everybody to know who you are and what you do, because it's just fantastic. I wish there were so many more just like you, and so many more organizations doing the great work that you do. The Institute for Justice, this is what I always say. I always say that they sue governments for violating people's constitutional rights, and often, maybe always, business owners' constitutional rights. And you've had such great success at it. Tell us a little bit about the Institute for Justice and about you.
Well, thanks, Bernie. I'm very, very fortunate. I really do have one of the best jobs in the world. I wake up every day and I sue the government. It's a lot of fun. I truly awesome. Enjoy what I do. The Institute for Justice, or IJ for short, is the nation's largest libertarian public interest law firm. Now, that's just small L libertarian. We're just philosophically libertarian, not affiliated with any parties or candidates. But we have over 150 employees now around our 7 offices spread out across the nation. I run our Florida office in Miami, and I litigate across the entire United States. I also do legislative work, including with this wonderful bill that was just signed by Governor DeSantis. And at IJ, we really litigate in 4 key areas of constitutional law. One, of course, the one that's near and dear to my heart, economic liberty, representing small business owners like food truck owners, and I've litigated food truck cases with some success, as you've mentioned. Another is school choice. You may have heard that not that long ago, there was a huge Supreme Court decision issued in the school choice case, Espinoza versus Montana Department of Revenue, involving these horrible anti-Catholic state constitutional amendments called Blaine amendments. That was our case. We represented the students and teachers and won that case at the U.S. Supreme Court. My colleague did at IJ. And so, we do some incredible school choice work. And then we also litigate with great success in the areas of free speech and property rights. And so those are really our four areas. I spend most of my time litigating for economic liberty on behalf of small business owners, but I have colleagues who also handle those other areas. And we have a wonderful, wonderful job that we get to do, where because of our generous donors, we never charge our clients anything, and we never sue for money. Instead, we travel around the nation representing people, and in my case, representing small business owners, pro bono, to convince judges to throw out unconstitutional laws. And then sometimes on the side, I'll go to Tallahassee or another state capital and help lawmakers who want to do the right thing to repeal bad laws, so then I can, focus my litigation efforts elsewhere. And so I was happy to help out with this terrific reform that Governor DeSantis just signed, both regarding the licensing aspects and the food truck aspects. But really, how I spend most of my time is suing the government, and I truly enjoy it.
Yeah, and there are a few state legislators who are making it easier for us to go to work and for us to live our lives. Blaise and Golia comes
Bernie,
to mind.
you still there?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. There you go. I lost you for a second. I said there are some legislators who are doing great work, aren't there? Like Blaise and Golia, for example, and a few others. But right. Justin, I've always been curious about you. How did you become so passionate? How did you become such a champion of these ideas? Who influenced you? Was it books you read? Was it people you looked up to? How did you become such a champion for liberty?
Well, I mean, there are quite a few sources, and I really appreciate your kind words. Obviously, there were many influences, but really the number one was my mom. My mom is a small business owner in South Florida. And the whole reason I decided to go to law school was that I looked around and I realized, the government has its army of lawyers, and the giant businesses have their army of lawyers. And there aren't that many lawyers helping out small business owners like my mom. And so the whole reason I went to law school was I wanted to represent small business owners like my mom. And that's what I did. After I worked for a firm for 3.5 years where I thought I had enough training, I went and started my own business in the form of a law practice in Broward County down here in South Florida to represent small business owners. My mom was my first client. I built it up. There was so much government abuse. My practice grew pretty quickly. But I became frustrated that I wasn't really able to fix anything. So it hadn't occurred to me beforehand that my small business owner clients wouldn't be able to afford to pay me to file some big constitutional challenges. So I was basically just performing triage, dealing with the same problems over and over again on behalf of different clients who were really just paying me for pain management and couldn't afford to challenge the problem directly. I became so frustrated that I started doing more and more pro bono work, oftentimes on behalf of food truck owners, trying to convince cities down here to get rid of their food truck bans. While that was happening, IJ opened up its Florida office in Miami. And so, I reached out to them because I've been a fan of IJ for a long time. That started a relationship. And about a year later, I ended up agreeing to close down my law practice and run their Miami office. And it's been a wonderful blessing. I basically get paid now a salary to do the things full time that I used to do for fun as pro bono work. And I think that's a great deal if you can get it.
It really is. Have people influenced you? Like, these are a couple of people who influenced my my thinking. And I say I'm a libertarian, too small L libertarian, but it often causes confusion. So I just say I'm a constitutionalist. I believe in property rights.
Bernie, I'm sorry, there might be some sort of problem with the connection.
I'm sorry. I think we got you back. I tell people that I believe in property rights and liberty and the rule of law. And when you say libertarian, that's really what you're talking about. And I'm curious if people like Walter Williams and John Stossel, if they influenced you. They influenced me a lot in my thinking over the last, say, 25 years or so.
Yeah, they really did. I loved the Stossel show so much, just because there weren't that many outlets, providing that perspective that appealed to me. And yeah, you mentioned Walter Williams. I mean, there's if you know where to look, right? And nowadays, there are ways to find these sources that weren't quite as apparent, when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. But if you know where to look, there are great places to provide, wonderful information in terms of economics and philosophy and the law. I think one of the biggest influences of all the different authors I read for me was Frederic Bastiat.
Yes.
I loved the law. I love the Candlemakers Petition. I don't know if you've ever read that.
Oh, yeah.
The Candlemakers Petition. Yeah, and just I think that had a big impact on me. And then, I mean, there's so many out there once you know where to look at. Thomas Sowell had an impact. I got really into public choice economics. I think public choice economics is super fascinating. For those who don't know, public choice economics is often called political science without the romance. Instead of looking at the things that politicians say, economists try to figure out why politicians actually do what they do, and voters do what they do. And frankly, I've seen many of the things that Dave discussed in the public choice research play out firsthand when I go to state legislatures. And so it's just been a fascinating experience for me to read about these things, years ago, and then see them firsthand now in my current job. But they're just wonderful. There are lots of wonderful influences out there, but definitely the two you mentioned, John Stossel and Walter Williams are among the top two, but thankfully there are others, that you just kind of have to know where to look.
Yeah, F.A. Hayek was big for me. Bastiat was huge for me. But you just mentioned something that got me. My next question to you is right in line. I was going to say, with the food trucks, right? You have local governments, just like Uber. You have local governments that will ban food trucks, and of course, it's for our own safety, right? We got to make sure that there's a level playing field between their competitors. I've heard them too, right? So they say that, right? And I always hear this. The city council where I am, you've got the mayor owned a diner. And he said, look, we just need a level playing field is all we need. So, and we need to make sure everything's safe, and we need to make sure that people eating have bathrooms is what we need. But if I don't believe them, I think there's another reason they do it. Why do you think they have these types of licenses and hurdles for food trucks? What do you think is the real reason, maybe?
Well, one thing we do know is there's no good reason, right? And there's been research done both by the Institute for Justice, where I work, and other places, showing that these food truck barriers, these restrictions on food truck competition, don't have any health and safety benefits. That food trucks, in terms of their cleanliness and their healthiness and their sanitation, they're as good or better than restaurants. And so there's no legitimate government reason for these restrictions. It's just kind of what I think you already know. It's just cronyism, right? It's politicians who have forgotten that it's not government's role to pick winners and losers in the marketplace. In America, that right belongs to consumers. Consumers get to decide who wins in the marketplace, but oftentimes you'll have politicians who either forget that fact, or despite the fact that they know it, they choose to ignore it for their own benefit or to benefit their friends. And we see that quite a bit with this interplay between restaurants and food trucks, where local governments, oftentimes at the behest of friends of theirs who happen to own restaurants, will pass these restrictions on competition. And they're outrageous, and we've had success in challenging them. I actually had a case in Fort Pierce not that long ago, where restaurant owners asked the Fort Pierce City Council to ban food trucks from operating within 500 feet of restaurants. And we went to court, and we got a preliminary injunction, because under the Florida Constitution, the Florida Supreme Court has held that laws that are designed solely for protectionist reasons are unconstitutional. And so one thing that I think is important to remember, not only does this new reform signed by Governor DeSantis restrict food truck laws on a local level, but local governments always, just like the state government, have to follow the state constitution, which also imposes restrictions, particularly when you're talking about laws designed to prevent competition.
That's so fantastic. I see it too. I mentioned Uber. We've got the rideshare companies now. And of course, who was against that? The big taxi companies. And the same arguments for your own good, for your own safety and all that stuff. But really, they didn't want the competition. They use it as a way to exclude the competition. So you get these business owners, they're financiers of their campaigns, who pay for their campaigns. Then the politicians turn around, put up barriers, protect the business, and it's for your own good. And I'm so happy that there are places like, well, there's not many. The Institute for Justice is what I see, and Justin Pearson is the one I see doing it, and your great colleagues like Ari. I know Ari. He's fantastic, isn't he? He's been a good teammate of yours.
He is. Our Bargle is a wonderful attorney, and we've worked on many cases together. And yeah, he's fantastic. All of my colleagues are fantastic. I do want to mention one more thing about food trucks, though, and about the cronyism you just described, Bernie, which is that it's actually misguided. In addition to being unconstitutional and just plain wrong, it actually misunderstands the dynamic between food trucks and restaurants. And it turns out food trucks actually help out downtown brick and mortar businesses, including restaurants. And you can think about it this way. Oftentimes cities will spend quite a bit of money trying to attract people into their downtown areas to check it out, hoping they'll come back. Food trucks will do that for free if you just let them. And we've actually seen this phenomenon play out in practice. I think a great example down here in South Florida is Hollywood, Florida. You know, for many years, Monday night was just a very slow night in downtown Hollywood. So slow that most of the restaurants downtown would just close. It wasn't worth opening up on Monday night. And so after the food trucks had asked enough times, Hollywood, over a decade ago now, decided to let food trucks have a downtown event on Monday nights because they figured, what the heck, the restaurants are closed anyway. We might as well let the food trucks have their event on Monday nights. That event became so popular and attracted so many people into downtown Hollywood that all those restaurants started reopening on Monday nights and making a ton of money from all the extra foot traffic brought in for free from food trucks as soon as the government allowed them to do so and stopped getting in the way. And we've seen that dynamic play out in other places as well, where I understand kind of this knee-jerk reaction that many restaurant owners have, where they assume that food trucks will hurt them. But it turns out that the food trucks will actually help them if you just give them a chance. And we've had restaurant owners who originally opposed food trucks and lose and have food trucks come in, realize later on and reverse themselves and apologize and say, you know what, I was wrong. These food trucks have actually helped out my business. But, you know, once government bans something, you never get a chance to find out,
right, you
know, what benefits they might bring. You're talking about Bastiat, right? It goes back to what's seen and unseen. These benefits become unseen if you ban them and never let them happen. It turns out if you let the food trucks in, they help out everybody, including the brick and mortar restaurant owners who originally were so scared.
You know, I'll tell you, Justin, Bastiat's so great. And one of the biggest lessons I ever learned in my life is don't only look at what is seen, look for what is not seen. And one of my favorite quotes is where he says, I'll paraphrase him, he says, government is that great fiction where some people try to live off everybody else. And it's my copy is 55 pages. 55 pages. He died in 1850, the French philosopher, economist. And the book, it just, I feel it. I feel his rage at these politicians who think they know better. The very opening line says the law is perverted. And what he means is the government is perverted and their incentives are perverted. I've gone way over time, Justin, because I enjoy our conversation so much. I've got to run. I hope we can do it again soon.
I hope so, Bernie. This has been fun.
Thank you so much. All right. We got to actually, I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to turn the show over to Joe Pags now. The Joe Pags Show coming up in just a few moments for the next 3 hours.
You're listening to The Bernie Thompson Show. More of you and Bernie straight ahead on Pensacola's only 24-hour information station, FM Talk 103.7, Talk 790 AM.